Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Right Path podcast, where being an author, an actual author, still matters. Folks, this is the podcast that's for authors. It's about authors. It's done by an author, where we share our journeys, we explore our creativity, and most importantly, we examine the ever-elusive why behind it all. Folks, our guest today it has an amazing story. I cannot wait to get into this. And this lady is the author of the book Light, Which Impresses. Please welcome to the show, Dorothy Ward. Dorothy, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Rory. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be on the show to speak with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. There is so much behind where this book came from and the story and whatnot. And I want to dig into all of it. To get us started, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about who is Dorothy Ward and, kind of what got you here?
Okay, thank you. I got my PhD in English and American literature from the University of North Texas. I got my master's degree and bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at El Paso, in English with a creative writing option. And I have taught at the University of Texas at El Paso. I've been a faculty member and an administrator for over 35 years. I'm now retired. And so, with all of that Texas educational background, it might come as a surprise that actually I'm not from Texas. My father was an Army officer, career Army officer. And so I was born in Heidelberg, Germany. And within the first 12 years of my education, I attended 8 different schools. So we moved a lot. But we kept returning to El Paso because Fort Bliss is headquartered in El Paso,
Mhm.
and my father was with Air Defense, and that was a major air defense center. And so we returned often to El Paso. So I began to think of El Paso as my home. I began to think of it as my home region. As an Army brat that moved all the time, I wanted to put down roots, and this area was an area that I fell in love with because of the blend of cultures, because there are 700,000 people approximately living in El Paso. About 81% are Hispanic or Latinx. So there's a nice blend of culture in El Paso. And I loved the culture. I loved the desert, the serenity of the desert, the beauty of the mountains, and was fascinated by the history. I don't actually live in El Paso. I live on the outskirts. I live in New Mexico. I have for the last 20 years. But El Paso is on the westernmost tip of Texas, which means it's on the border of New Mexico. So I live across the street from Texas. So that's a little bit about me.
My goodness. All right. I mean, I personally love it in Texas. I've visited there a million times and just can't quite get my wife to move from the Midwest. But, we're Indiana folks, and
Ah,
we kind of look at that as like the Texas of the Midwest.
okay.
So at least that's what I'm telling myself since I still live here. But I mean, that's amazing. So Army brat moved all over the place. And now, New Mexico, was there a particular draw to New Mexico for you, or is that like did you end up there, so to speak?
I truly am right across the street from Texas. I'm right across the state line. And I live here because I have a blue-eyed horse, a rescue donkey, and 2 German Shepherds. So I was looking for some land.
I
So I
see.
moved into an area that I have an acre and a half of land with the
Great.
animals on it. So that's why New Mexico. And it's right in the proximity. It's right across the street from El Paso as well. I drive down the street and suddenly I'm in Texas. So it was close to work and close to my friends.
Great. The now the story behind your book, it sounds like it may be regional in nature, in terms of what you grew up experiencing, because the one of the people, I guess, in the book is a sola
Soldadera.
soldadara
Soldadera.
soldadera. Okay, got it. Tell us a little bit about the book. For folks who haven't had the opportunity to read all the information that I have, and then we can kind of get into where this all came from.
Okay. The book is set in El Paso, Texas during the Mexican Revolution. And the
Okay.
Mexican Revolution was between 1910 and 1920. The book focuses on about 1911, 1916, so the earlier years of the Mexican Revolution. And so it's used as a backdrop. The main character, the protagonist, is a photographer, Sarah Delaney, and she lives in El Paso. And she takes photographs of the Mexican Revolution, among other photographs. And so the book is about her life experience in El Paso during the Mexican Revolution. In the novel, it actually moves through, between two periods. I mentioned the 1911, 1916, but it's in five sections, and each section is framed by an interview, and those interviews are set in 1983. When the main character, Sarah Delaney, is 91 years old, she reaches out to two professors who are at the Institute of Oral History at the University of Texas at El Paso, and she invites them into her home to interview her about her life in El Paso during the Mexican Revolution. Well, they're completely shocked by this contact because Sarah Delaney is known as a recluse, a bit of a recluse. And so she doesn't attend her photo openings. She doesn't attend museums openings where they're discussing her photographs. She's very much a recluse. And in fact, there's a bit of a rumor that she is either really debilitated or no longer alive. But she explains to them that they're both interested in revisiting the past. They both have something, the professors and she both have something to gain from revisiting the past. So she's wanting to get something out of these interviews, which is why she invites him into her home. And as I said, the interviews, there are five sections, and the interviews, each interview is framed. Well, let me rephrase that. Each section is framed by the interviews. And in the middle portion, it's Sarah telling her experiences during the social and political upheaval of the Mexican Revolution.
Wow.
And you mentioned it being regional. I would like to add one of the things that fascinated me as I was working through the novel is that it took place essentially during the revolution over 100 years ago, but so many of the issues that were addressed at that time are still issues at the forefront. You know, the tensions that exist sometimes between the US-Mexico relationship, the countries, immigration, deportation, smuggling, racial profiling and race rioting. These are all sorts of issues that were addressed during this period in El Paso and continue to be at the forefront of our national news.
hmm I noticed that you mentioned that in some of the reading that I was doing to familiarize myself with yourself and your book. The You mentioned these issues several times. It seems like these issues are fairly important to you.
Well, I'll tell you that there are certain things that are important to me. The issues that we're faced with today with
hmm
immigration and the handling of immigrants and refugees. During the Mexican Revolution, the border was much more porous, and people were leaving Mexico because of the fighting, because they were being killed, they were starving, they were being forced into the military, there was tremendous poverty,
hmm
there was illness, and so we see some of the same today, and that is important to me, the immigration and the refugees
I see.
coming to the United States.
I understand. I understand. The In terms of how you've woven it into the book, the well, let me take a step back on that one because the way that this book kind of came to be also is a little bit unique because you sort of started it one way and then maybe put it away for a little bit, then you came back to it, and then you kind of changed some things. What's this story there for the folks who don't know anything about it yet?
Well, in 1983, way back, there was an article in the local newspaper about a woman, an elderly woman who lived in Ciudad Juarez, which is right across the river from El Paso. She said she was a colonel in Pancho Villa's army. Well, that took me by surprise. One, I didn't know much about the Mexican Revolution, and I certainly didn't know about women in the Mexican Revolution. So I became very interested. My father was a history buff as well as a photographer, and he and I, along with two friends, got the address of the older woman and headed across the river to Juarez to meet with her. Unfortunately, when we got to her residence, she was no longer living there. And the neighbors would not give her new address. Understandably so. Here, strangers show up and are asking for an address. But that notion about a woman fighting in the revolution fascinated me. And so I started doing some research about soldaderas. And soldaderas were women who followed the troops. They were with the troops. And sometimes they preceded them because they would set up camp. They would cook the food, they would forage for supplies, they would raise children, they would care for the injured, and they'd pick up a gun and fight. Some of the soldaderas even led troops. And so this fascinated me. But in 1983, I was in the middle of working on my PhD, and I had doctoral comps and I had a doctoral dissertation to research and write. So I put it all aside to focus on completing my degree. And once I completed my degree, I came back to it because it was a story that interested me. And as you said, I started, after I'd done considerable research, I started writing the novel. And that was probably in the late 90s. So it took quite a while. It was a story that just really grabbed me. And I started writing the novel. And when I started writing it, I thought Kata or Catalina, who is the Soldadera, that she was going to be the protagonist of my novel. I wrote about 120 pages, and Catalina was the protagonist of the novel. Then I got a new position, and that new position was at the university. And that new position was very, very demanding in terms of time and energy. And so I simply didn't have the intellectual energy to continue writing the book. So I set the book aside, though I didn't forget about it. I continued to read about the revolution and investigate it. Um, but when I retired then, I thought, I'm writing this book, I'm finishing it. So I went to pick it up and read what I had written, and I realized I really cannot honestly write from the perspective of a Mexican woman fighting for her country. That isn't going to be believable. It's not realistic. It's not honest.
Hmm.
And so I set the book aside, rethought it, and came up with the character Sarah Delaney, who is the photographer. And so the Soldadetta still plays a major role in the novel, and we still get into her experiences and memory, but the novel itself is told from the perspective of Sarah, the photographer. So a lengthy way. The novel was finally published in July 2025, so it took quite a while to complete it. But I think the decision to start anew was the right decision. And I think it's a
Nice.
better book because of it.
Nice. Nice. A lot of folks would just have sort of plowed right on through and said, no, this is the book. This is how we have to do it. Um, was there a turn of events, or was there, something that happened that made you kind of say, take it a step back? Did you hit a spot in the writing where you said, wow, I just can't do this anymore? Or was it just an overall gradual, kind of, hey, I need to go do it to a different direction?
I was ready to start writing the book again. And when I
Okay.
started reading what I had written so far, I thought, no, I can't continue this. I can't continue writing in a believable fashion about experiences in Mexico when they weren't experiences that I was truly familiar with. And I just didn't, again, I didn't think it was an honest book writing from the perspective of the Mexican woman. Not that as a fiction writer, I mean, we do. I also wasn't a woman living in the 1910s either,
Right.
although I may look it. But um, I think there's a level of creativity and experience that you write from that may not be something, it may be an emotional experience you had versus an actual experience as a writer that you can write from. But I just thought there was too much involved in this notion of the Mexican woman for me to assume that I could be in her head. And I just didn't think I was going to make a believable book that way.
Yeah.
So and it hurt, by the way, to start over. It hurt terribly, but I did start over.
Wow. I mean, you had to really want to put this book out to be able to stop and say, I can't do it the way I was doing it. So, there seems like there's quite a bit of desire behind this, almost a will to put this out. I'm curious, um, where's that coming from? This really wanting to get this book out there.
I knew I had a good story. I knew, and plus, the book is a bit of a love story to El Paso and El Paso history.
Ah,
It's not necessarily a pretty history, as is true with much of, you know, our country and other countries. We don't necessarily have a pretty history, but it was a love for El Paso and what the people of the community lived through and the relationship that exists between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. So it was a good story. It was a good story to be told. And I also like strong, unconventional women characters. And that's what I was able to create with both the photographer and with Catalina, the soldadera. So
nice.
I was able to develop really strong characters.
Are you one of the characters in the book?
No.
No, none of this is based on you,
No, none of it. Well, I mean, I think I'm probably a strong, unconventional woman as
huh?
well, but
That's kind of
but
where I was going.
but but no, I don't see myself as one of the characters.
Okay. I ask this often nowadays, it seems like, but only when it hits me. Again, there seems like there's a big purpose behind this story. When we're writing our books, whatever they may be, we tend to have someone that we're kind of envisioning, a character or a person or even ourselves sometimes, where we're writing our book to someone or for someone. And I'm very curious, this purpose-driven book that you're putting out there. Um, who are you writing this book to or for?
That's an interesting question, and I haven't really thought a lot about it. I mean, in part I was writing it to El Pasoans because we don't get a lot of the history about the region in our education, either in El Paso or elsewhere. And so some of it was sharing some of the history of El Paso. I now that you asked that question, I think also it was for my father. My father was, as I said, a history buff and a photographer. He loved, though he was from Florida originally, he loved the Southwest and loved El Paso and was very interested in preserving the history of it. And he had great faith in me. And so he knew I was working on the book and before he passed away, and he hoped that I would finish it. So I think part of it was finishing it for my father as well, but it was finishing it for me too.
Sure. I love that. I'm glad to hear that. All right. The I'm sure your father, would approve of the book.
I
So,
hope so. I think he would. I think he
yeah,
would.
wonderful. Um, Goodness gracious. The process is something I always like to ask about, but you kind of had a little process and then you left it off and then you came back. When you started writing, as opposed to when you got to pick back up writing, um, was the process changed from there? Had you not really developed one yet? And, what was it when you got going on the book for real the second time?
Well, I did a tremendous amount of research prior to initiating the book. I did
Okay.
a lot of reading of books, of memoirs of people who lived at the time in the El Paso region and fought in the Mexican Revolution. I read novels about the Mexican Revolution, read newspapers that were written at the time, went to museums, took walking tours that were conducted by local historians, focused on the revolution. So there was and I studied photographs of the period and read about photographers and all sorts of things. A tremendous amount of research went into preparing to write the book. And so once I felt that I had sufficient knowledge of the book, I knew the beginning. Well, this is really the second half of it. Once I returned to the book, I reviewed the research that I had done, and I had the beginning in mind and the end in mind. But I allowed the book to develop organically. I'm not somebody who outlines what's going to happen in the book. And so I let it grow organically. And some of it was driven by the historical events that were taking place. As I read the newspaper and read what was happening at that time period in El Paso and in Ciudad Juarez, that drove a little bit of the direction of the book.
Hmm.
But it's E.L. Doctorow, who is a writer that I like very much, a historical fiction writer. Well, he writes more than historical fiction, but he's famous for his historical fiction. The author of Ragtime and The March, those novels. He said writing for him was like driving at night with the lights on. You can see just so far ahead, but you eventually complete the journey. And so that's sort of how I wrote. I knew again, knew the beginning, knew the end, had my main characters, and I let them go. When I first started writing, because I was working, I was writing in the evenings, and so I would spend 2 to 3 hours at home in the evening. Once I retired and revisited the novel, then I would start writing about mid-morning and write till about mid-afternoon. And it was important for me to write daily because I found that if I took a break, which I did on occasion, went out of town or whatever, it was hard to get back to the novel. Once I got back, it took a long time to get to where I was going. And so that whole process was important to try to write on a daily basis so that it was all fresh. I also tried to always conclude with some lines on a page. So I wasn't facing a blank page, which is a bit daunting as a writer, as you would know. So I try to make sure that I come back to something I was working on and had started on the page and knew where I was going. But that was my process. And I continued to do research as it was needed. For example, one of the character learns to drive a 1913 Roadster. And so I had to study how do you drive one of those cars because it's completely different from how you would drive a
Right.
vehicle today. And so I would do research on certain topics as I needed, as I was writing. So that's a little bit about the writing process that I followed. Once I completed the novel, I did a tremendous amount of revising. When I completed the novel, the first draft of the novel, it was 100 pages longer than it is today. The book right now is about 382 pages long. So it was 100 pages
Wow.
longer. I'd gotten a little bit into the weeds with history. And so I had to pare back some of the historical details because they were accurate, but they didn't add to the progress of the story necessarily. And so I made some hard decisions, and the writer Faulkner said you have to kill your little darlings sometimes, and that's what I was doing, and painful as it was, but yeah, I did pare back the book considerably,
Wow.
and I think it's a better book as a result.
So you acted as your own editor on the book as well?
I did, I
Oh my
did.
goodness. I mean, it's almost
Uh,
like being your own lawyer in court. So hard to do.
Well, and it was hard, and I probably went through, oh, I probably six versions of it.
Wow.
With each time I would pare it back, and then I'd go through it once again. So it took months and months to revise the book.
Right. Good for you, though. I mean, that's quite the skill to be able to act as your own, editor, moving forward. So wow. Okay. I know you have your main characters, and you sort of fleshed those out. Had some backstory. Just in the couple minutes we got to hear about Sarah. For instance, we got to hear a lot. That you had already kind of put into her backstory and whatnot. How about your other characters? Now, when you write in terms of how you personally went about it, you said you did it organically and it sort of just happened. Do the characters then sort of become introduced because of the story? And hey, maybe I need a shopkeeper here, or maybe I need somebody else who has a little bit of a influential part, or do you have a cast of characters first, and then the story works around getting them into it?
It was a little bit of both. I had most of the main characters already as I started writing, but as I continued writing, I introduced new characters that became quite important in the novel. For example, there's one who, A.J. Otis, who owns a photography shop and he develops photographs and he is interested in Sarah's photographs of the Mexican Revolution when she first takes them. She is her beau is a captain in the what was essentially a foreign legion of the Mexican Revolution. There were a number of foreign soldiers who fought in the revolution, and Garibaldi was the leader of that foreign legion, I'll call it for lack of a better word or term. And her beau bought her the camera and took her over to the camp over in Juarez while there was a lull waiting. There were peace negotiations, and so and this is based on fact, actually. El Pasoans crossed the river readily, were fascinated with the insurrectos, the rebels, fighters, and would go over there and visit with them and take photographs with them and take food and toss coins to them and toss fruit across the river to them. And there was just a fascination with them. And so she has gone across the border to take photographs. And when she takes her photographs to be developed, the individual AJ who is developing the photographs is fascinated by them and wants to buy the negatives and create picture postcards, which again, those were very, very popular at that time, the selling of picture postcards and the collection of them. And so he was a character that I had not thought about prior. But once she makes that connection and he takes her under his wing, he becomes a very important character in the novel and then is developed. So he's one that I didn't think of in advance. Um, a number of the characters, it's historical fiction, so none of the main characters are actual people,
Okay.
but several of the characters are based on actual people,
Okay.
or a combination of people, and so that lived in El Paso during that period and were involved in the revolution in some way or another. One is a
Nice.
newspaper reporter. Another one is the beau, who is a captain in the military, and then the photographer, A.J. Otis, the man who owns the shop, is sort of based on a photographer here in El Paso. Very,
Nice.
very loosely, but not much beyond the fact that he was a photographer, but nevertheless, it spurred the development of this character.
Nice. It's what works in that moment too, in terms of the comparison. So that was that was the guy. I gotcha. Um, it's always interesting to hear how people come up with, their stories, come up with their characters and that sort of thing. That is another thing I think that makes the editing a little bit difficult. Do you find that you get sort of attached to your characters? You mentioned sometimes we have to get rid of our little babies, but do you become attached to your characters after you've put so much into them and you've brought them into the storyline and almost obligated to them?
I do actually. I hurt when they hurt. I know I'm going to put somebody through hell because of the pain that's going to result, but I write it out anyway. And yes, they become real and they become real people. And so it's a painful process.
Yeah. The Mexican War, that you've talked about, the revolution that you
Mhm.
have discussed. Did you become interested in that because of sort of where you lived and the history there, or was this something you came across in your studies? I mean, you're very well versed in history, and things like that. So did this period and this particular event have, any kind of personal connection for you? Because you've devoted a lot of time to learning about it, writing about it, and almost living in it for this period while you put the book out.
It truly hinged on that chance moment of here's the newspaper article about a woman who said she was a colonel in Pancho Villa's army.
Wow.
That was the spark, and that's what hooked me and got me interested in the Mexican Revolution. Having said that, El Paso has a tremendous amount of history. And so, for example, there's a laundromat that still exists that's close to the border. And so El Pasoans, I mean, when the revolution took place, one of the major battles of the first portion of the revolution was in the Battle of Ciudad Juarez. And so El Pasoans climbed to the top of the laundromat, or the laundry. The laundry had a flat roof, and they stood on the laundry and looked across the border at the fighting. And it was quite a big deal. It was a piece of entertainment. People would line the rivers, the river rather, the levee to watch the fighting going on in Juarez. And so it became really something that was of interest and that was of entertainment. So there's so many sites still in El Paso. There's a famous hotel, Hotel Paso del Norte, that plays a major role in the novel that that still exists and is still a major hotel downtown. It's been renovated multiple times, and that too, the flat roof served as a vantage point to watch the revolution. So just the fact that there is so much there. Pancho Villa was in El Paso. General Pershing. These are characters that are part of the novel, historical characters that are part of the novel and ingrained and that Sarah Delaney interacts with. And so there's just so much of that history still visible in El Paso. I mentioned that laundry. It actually has pockmarks on it from the bullets that crossed over the border during the Revolution. So all of that was fascinating to me and had me hooked.
My
Uh,
goodness.
if I may, I want to mention something about the title because I
Sure.
know the title's a little bit unusual,
Hmm.
but it's actually also it's taken from the epigraph in the novel. And when I was doing my research, part of it was reading a manual for the Kodak 3A folding pocket camera, which is the camera that Sarah had when she first started. Her beau gave it to her for her 19th birthday. And so I needed to know about that camera. And as I was reading the manual, I came across this that I thought when I read it, this is beautiful. This is a found poem, and this fits the novel perfectly. So if I may read it, the first thing to remember is that the light which impresses the photographic image upon the sensitive film in a fraction of a second when it comes through the lens can destroy the film as quickly as it makes the picture. And so that leads into the novel that something that you can create, you can also destroy very easily. And so
Wow.
the light which impresses fits with the direction of the novel without giving anything away.
Gotcha. That was definitely one of the questions I was going to ask you before I got done. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Good,
It is
good.
a very unique title, so it had to have a meaning somewhere behind it. I love this, and I appreciate you sharing, all of this about how, your character development and so on. As you've gotten this together, you act as your own editor and so on. How did you handle the publishing end of this whole thing?
And I would say this to listeners who haven't published, don't give up. It's just hard to get published. It
Mhm.
simply is. There's a lot of work out there. And I tried to have it published commercially with a larger press, but I had to have an agent to do that. And I submitted to agent after agent after agent and could never get any buy-in. And I finally thought about it and thought, well, okay, why am I trying a commercial press when I might find a smaller press that would be interested in it and provide the same sort of attention? And so, with that in mind, I started looking at university presses. And the one that ended up, well, it was actually the first one I submitted to was TCU Press out of Fort Worth.
Hmm.
And I submitted to them, and they published both fiction, nonfiction, and scholarly manuscripts as well. But they are interested in Texas literature and Texas history. And so I found a publisher that had that niche and I could submit to them, and luckily they accepted it. So what I would say to listeners who haven't published is don't give up and continue to look. There are independent publishers, there are university publishers. If you've got a good book, you'll find somebody who's interested. Don't give up on yourself.
No,
I'll share one piece. I mentioned that I got my master's degree in English with a creative writing background. And so my thesis, my master's thesis, was a novel. And it was back in the day where you sent things snail mail and you sent hard copies of material. And so I sent to an agent, and the very first agent I sent to said, "Love it, send me the book." And so I sent her the entire book. Well, she wrote back and said, "I don't think your book, I like your book, but I don't think it's strong enough to carry both characters." I never submitted the book again. I let that tell me that it shouldn't be published.
Uh,
And so what I'm trying to stress is don't be like I was when I was, 22, 23 years old. Keep at it, and find the publisher that'll work for you.
nice. Nice. The with this particular kind of a book, which is based on apparently an incredible article that really was life-changing, this article. But how do you go about marketing this then?
Well, boy, that has been a lesson for an old woman on the marketing. I tell you what, I thought you make it and they will come,
Right.
sort of thing,
That's what we
and,
all
and
think when we
that
write.
yeah, that just isn't the case. So I'm learning to do a variety of things. I just got a website created to help market it. I'm doing podcasts to try to introduce people to it.
Sure.
My next approach is to go to the local libraries that may be sponsoring book groups
Mhm.
and to try to get them to adopt it as the book as one of their books that they will read and discuss. And I'm putting myself out there to attend book groups. Um, I have to say, TCU Press has a wonderful marketing coordinator who every week sends out information. And so these are all her ideas. And so I'm trying to follow up. But what I've learned is not only is it your job to write the book, it's your job to sell it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
somebody has spent quite a bit of money publishing it for you, and so you've got to get out there and do your part. The other thing I've done is I've marketed it to a lot of libraries. I've written to libraries, telling them about the book and trying to encourage them to purchase the book for the library collection. So
Gotcha.
those are some of the things that I've done to market it.
Gotcha. Well, getting on the podcast is certainly a great idea. And
I agree.
you're a wonderful guest. So
Thank you.
I think you're going to do fine there. You left out a very big component of marketing your book, though. And
Okay.
I'm curious, you're not if you're doing anything on social media at all.
You know, I'm not.
It's
I'm
okay.
other than the website. I so want to do Facebook and I so want to do X or something like that. But the truth is I don't think I'm working on another book and I just don't know that I have the energy to do all of those different things. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I probably will come around to doing some things on social networks, but I haven't yet. I
I
haven't.
just had to ask. It was such a huge leave out when you were giving me this great list of all these things, and I went, "There's a story here.
Yeah,
Somebody doesn't like
I'm
social
avoiding
media."
it.
There you
No,
go.
I'm avoiding it.
I got you. All right. Had to ask. Had to ask. But no, I appreciate your honesty, about all of it because, I'm an older guy and I had a heck of a time getting into things like social media and learning, a lot of this stuff back in the day. And if it wasn't for my kids teaching me all this stuff, I'm not sure I would know how to use it today either. But it really does. There's a different way to market every book. And so you don't have to be in any one spot. It's just that some people have certain strengths some places and not others. So, again, I appreciate you being open and honest about it. It's important for folks to hear this. When you went through your smaller publisher, okay,
Yes.
so is it what you would call a hybrid publisher? I mean, do you pay for the books
No,
that you bring to the shows? I mean, do they provide you some sort of service like that? I'm curious what the upside was to going through the publisher you went through for the folks who listen.
well, if you go to the events that where they have a tent,
Hmm.
then they bring the books for you to sell.
Excellent.
Um, but otherwise, yes, you're correct. If I were to do a reading and then I would have to purchase the books in advance and have them at the reading.
Okay. Yeah,
So
that's
they
what I thought.
so Yeah, so TCU Press, if you attend some of their events, for example, in November, there's the Texas Book Festival that I'm hoping to be a part of with TCU Press, and they'll set everything up. They'll make all the arrangements. I just show up,
Nice.
and so I can do that.
Nice, nice. I'm sure you can. Now, you alluded to something here a second ago when I was asking you about social media, and I'm not going to let it go. You said you're doing another book.
I am.
Tell us a little bit about that if you can.
Oh, I'd love to. I've got about 150 pages on it. And I will tell you, Henry James said, the writer Henry James said, try to be the type of person that doesn't just let things go by, that you're aware. I didn't say that very well, but essentially don't overlook things that you're introduced to, take advantage of them. Well, when I was doing the research on the Mexican Revolution, there was reference to a major battle at Cowboy Park in Juarez. And I had never heard of Cowboy Park. So, and it doesn't exist nowadays. So I wanted to know what in the world is Cowboy Park? Well, lo and behold, there's a book written about it. And so I got the book, and it was at one time, steer wrestling was outlawed in certain states like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, places you wouldn't think it would be outlawed. But it was outlawed because of steers getting injured. Cowboys would practice their skills on the ranch and injure the cattle, and they'd have to be put down. So, so it was outlawed. So some enterprising people in El Paso bought an area in Juarez and opened up a park for rodeo. And so that was Cowboy Park. Well, in reading about it, I came across again another woman who was a rodeo performer. She was a steer wrestler, or steer roper rather, a steer roper. And we're not talking about calf roping now. We're talking about steers.
Right.
And so she oftentimes beat the men at the competitions. And so I thought, well, I'll be darned. Now we have women in the rodeo. Let me start reading about them. And as I started researching them, I learned that in the 1920s, that was the heyday for women in rodeo. And they competed on bronc riding, they competed on steer wrestling, trick riding, bulldogging. They competed in a number of ways and they both had the adventure of traveling and being independent, but they also, when they won, they earned good money, more money than they would earn in the traditional roles. And so and they were tremendously skilled women. And eventually they got pushed out of the rodeo as we moved towards the Depression. There were economic, societal, political pressures that were put into place where they were no longer allowed to participate and compete in these sort of rough stock rodeo events. And instead, we came up with the beauty queen, so the rodeo queen. So women began to be judged on their appearance versus on their skills. And so that is the basis of the book. I am writing about some women rodeo riders and developing that over that span from where they were very popular and it was the heyday to the period where they're pushed out of the rodeo.
Wow. Okay. I mean, knew there was a story there. I'm like, all right, come on. We got to get to this. So, all right, we're getting the scoop on the new book that's coming out. I love it. So,
Good.
all right. Well, congratulations on this book
Thank
and
you.
good luck on the next book. And
Thank you.
certainly would love to have you back on when you have that come out to
Great.
talk about it at that as well. I do have one more question for you. Before I hit that, I want to make sure that I get some information out. Normally, I ask about things like social media links and all that, but we'll just say contact information and maybe website, email, any way that somebody might be able to contact you to ask about the book, purchase it. Give us your contact information so everybody can write it down real quick.
Okay. I do have a website.
Okay.
It's dorothypward.com. And on that website, it does have a way to contact me, and it also has links to the book. You can purchase the book as an e-copy or as a paperback from most book distributors, from TCU Press directly, or Amazon, or Bookshop, or Barnes and Noble. So it's readily available.
Love it. All right, good deal. As we kind of bring this down to a close time-wise, I want to thank you for sharing everything you have. I really would love to read that original article because apparently it was incredible. Do you have that article still?
I do, though I can't find it, but I've got it here in the house somewhere. I printed it out, but I can't find it for the moment.
My goodness. Well, I hope you do find it again because that's something that definitely should be, maybe an appendix, to the book or something.
Oh,
Maybe
good
Appendix
suggestion.
A,
Yeah,
something like that, right? Because that's what created all this. That's amazing. Anyway, just, thought I'd throw that out there. But
good suggestion.
um, you're a published author, and so congratulations on that. And we have a lot of folks who listen to this show who are either authors who are not quite there yet, maybe they are aspiring authors, and they all love the answer to this question, no matter what it is. So I like to ask it of all my published authors that come on the show. What is your best advice to folks who are out there and are just not quite where you are yet?
This may sound like it's simplistic, but right. E.L. Doctorow said, talking about writing, outlining, researching, none of those make up writing. Writing makes up writing. So you just finally, I mean, you've got to do the hard work to prep to write, but finally, you just have to sit down and start writing. And know that your first draft is not going to be a masterpiece. It's going to be the clay that you've put on the wheel that you're now going to shape and mold as you revise it. But the key is to start writing, and you're never too old. I'm living proof. You're never too old to start writing, but it takes putting your seat in a seat and putting your fingers on a computer or a pen or however you choose to write, but write.
Wonderful. I love that advice. That's absolutely fantastic. And it seems simplistic, but you're right. I think it's sort of the thing that we avoid. We want to do all the other stuff. Let me make my outline. Let me prepare for it. But at some point, you actually have to sit down and write. Wonderful.
Good.
Absolutely wonderful. All right. Dorothy P. Ward, author of Light, Which Impresses, with a fantastic story behind it. Dorothy, thank you for sharing that story and for letting all of us know, what was behind it, what went into the work, and about the new works yet to come, about the rodeo. It's been a fantastic interview. You're a great guest, and I really appreciate you being on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rory, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And you're a wonderful host.
Oh, thank you for that. Well, I'll take it. Folks, that's been another fantastic episode of the Right Path podcast, where you know what? The truth still matters and words still have power. This is the place for authors who know that every single page is a step forward towards finding your right path. Until next time.